There's another one. The ultrasound technician leaned closer to the monitor, lips slightly parted. She blinked twice. Wait, 3. There are 3. Alina gasped. Kalen didn't. His eyes were locked on the screen, motionless, not from shock, from release. For 10 years he had waited to hear something, anything, other than I'm sorry. 1 flicker, then 2, now 3. 3 heartbeats. For a man who had spent years being laughed at, doubted and quietly dismissed as the CEO with no children, this moment wasn't a celebration, it was redemption. Let me ask you something. Have you ever chased a dream so relentlessly only to have life push it further and further away? People whispered behind Kalen's back. He's sterile. All that wealth and no heir. His wife deserves better. They didn't know about the 5 failed IVF attempts. The closet floor where he broke down sobbing alone. Or how, night after night, he stayed awake listening for the sound of something that never came. Until now. 3. Before we go further, let me say this. If you believe some miracles aren't loud but quiet and hard-earned, hit that like button and subscribe. This story will shake something in you, maybe even restore it. They called him the man with no future, but in one night, one impossible, unplanned night, Kalen Vieira became what they said he never would. A father. Stay with me. The world saw Kalen Vieira as a titan, clean suits, glass towers, perfect posture. But they never saw the nights he stood in the kitchen at 2 a.m., staring at an untouched bottle of prenatal vitamins, weeks expired. Or the way his wife, Alina, flinched each time someone said, "Still no kids?" Or the way her smile never quite reached her eyes anymore. People assumed they were too career-focused, that they'd waited too long, that maybe they didn't want children after all. No one asked what it cost them to keep trying. In public, Kalen was composed, unbothered, in control. But inside, he was a man breaking in slow motion. He sold his boat to pay for one last round of treatments, quietly downsized his personal staff, canceled trips, and every time Alina walked out of a doctor's office holding back tears, he'd tell her, "It's okay." But it wasn't. Their home, once full of music and laughter, had gone silent. Not cold, just hollow, like a house waiting for life to return. They stopped answering messages from friends with toddlers, skipped baby showers, said next time to every birthday party invite, because it was easier to stay quiet than explain why their arms were still empty. And still, despite everything, he showed up to work each day like a man who'd already won. They didn't see the weight he carried behind every headline, until the day the story changed. That's what you're about to hear, not just a headline, but the truth behind it. The heartbreak, the silence, the one night that changed it all, and the 3 lives that answered a prayer spoken in complete darkness. Vieira Global Imports was more than a company. It was Kalen's life's work. From a cramped one-room office with flickering lights and second-hand furniture, he'd built an enterprise that stretched across continents. His business didn't just move products, it moved livelihoods. Artisans from remote villages, previously unknown to the outside world, now had their creations sitting on shelves in major U.S. stores, thanks to him. For every deal he struck, every market he unlocked, every brand he elevated, the world applauded. His name began to circulate in boardrooms, conferences, and financial journals. By 45, he'd been invited to speak at summits. By 47, his face had appeared on magazine covers with bold headlines. The trade whisperer, the connector, the quiet king of commerce. He spoke little in interviews. When he did, it was measured, poised, always composed. To most, Kalen Vieira had it all. But no one saw what wasn't printed. Behind those headlines was a man who carried more silence than sound. A man who went home each night to a house built for 5, but lived in by 2. There were 4 empty bedrooms in the Vieira estate. One had soft yellow wallpaper and hand-carved crib rails gathering dust. Another had shelving lined with unopened storybooks, still wrapped in cellophane. Alina had once picked out the titles. She'd arranged them in alphabetical order, hoping the child they dreamed of would love stories the way she did. Years later, they hadn't been touched. At networking events, colleagues would make offhand jokes. "Kalen, you're smart. Kids just slow you down. Must be nice having a clean house and full nights of sleep." He would smile, nod, sip quietly. He never corrected them, never explained the real reason there weren't toys on the floor or fingerprints on the walls, because some wounds bleed quietly, and some men don't speak of pain. They absorb it. The harshest words came not from strangers, but from whispers just loud enough to hear. He's brilliant, but there's no one to carry it forward. You'd think a man like that would have at least one child by now. All that success. And no one to call him dad. These weren't statements, they were judgments. Kalen never said the word legacy out loud, but it lingered in everything he did. When he launched new divisions overseas, he pictured a future boardroom where his child might one day sit across from him, eager to take the reins. When he walked the floors of his distribution centers, he imagined pointing things out to a small hand tugging at his sleeve, asking questions only a curious son or daughter would think to ask. But each year that passed without a child sharpened the quiet realization the future he envisioned might never arrive. And slowly, the milestones he once celebrated began to feel hollow. On his 50th birthday, his executive team hosted a surprise celebration at the top floor of a 5-star hotel. Champagne flowed, glasses clinked, a custom cake had been flown in from a bakery in Paris. Someone toasted, "To Kalen, may the next generation of leaders learn from a man like you." He smiled graciously, but that night, when the crowd had cleared and the lights dimmed, Kalen sat at the edge of his bed, staring at a stack of unopened gifts. There was no card made with crayons, no messy handwriting, no voice yelling, "Happy birthday, Dad!" Just quiet. And quiet has a way of echoing when you're hoping to hear laughter instead. Alina had stopped decorating the guest rooms years ago. She said it made her tired, not physically, but somewhere deeper. The last nursery catalog still sat at the bottom of her drawer. Pages bookmarked, a corner stained by tears she'd never admit were hers. Kalen began to question things he never used to. What did success matter if it ended with him? What was the point of building something if there was no one to inherit the blueprint? At board meetings, when younger executives spoke about their kids, school recitals, scraped knees, first soccer games, he listened politely. But the silence inside him roared louder, not because he envied them, but because he'd spent his life creating opportunity and couldn't create a family of his own. He wasn't angry, just tired of nodding through small talk, tired of pretending the whispers didn't hurt, tired of being celebrated for what he built while being quietly pitied for what he hadn't. And yet, through all of it, he never gave up, not on Alina, not on himself, not on the dream. Because somewhere deep down, even if it was just a flicker, hope still lived. Kalen met Alina at a charity art exhibit in Atlanta. She stood in front of a canvas painted entirely in deep shades of blue, motionless, lips parted, as if she were listening to it breathe. He didn't say anything at first. He just watched her watch the art. In a room filled with chatter and clinking glasses, she was still, present, clear. Later that night, he told her, "You looked like you were speaking to it." She smiled without turning. Some things speak louder when they don't say a word. He never forgot that line. Their courtship wasn't loud or rushed. It was quiet but steady, like water shaping stone. Long walks after closing hours at the gallery, late-night phone calls that slipped into dawn. She would slip handwritten quotes into his coat pocket. He would bring her coffee exactly the way she liked it. 1 sugar, no cream, lid turned sideways so the mouthpiece never aligned with the seam. They were opposites in many ways. Alina, dreamy and expressive. Kalen, focused and restrained. But together they made sense. He gave her grounding. She gave him softness. When he proposed, it wasn't in a grand speech. Just a whispered question as they lay under a skylight one evening. "Will you stay with me, even when the world isn't easy?" She answered by reaching for his hand. Their wedding was small. Close friends, soft lights, music played on strings. During their vows, Alina said, "I don't need forever to be perfect. I just need you to choose me every day." Kalen, for once, struggled for words. He ended up kissing her hand instead of speaking. She understood. At first, their home was filled with moments that could have been stitched into poetry. Cooking barefoot in the kitchen, reading to each other from dog-eared books, falling asleep mid-conversation. He would rest his head on her lap while she ran her fingers through his hair, humming tunes from old records. They talked about children, chose names, picked colors for walls not yet built. The future seemed as natural as breath, but months passed. Then years. Tests began. Doctors entered the picture. Schedules, procedures, medications. Terms like egg retrieval and morphology became part of their vocabulary. The home changed. Not physically, but in feeling. They no longer laughed as much in the kitchen. Meals became quiet. Conversations shortened. Joy had turned into hope. And then hope turned into effort. They slept in the same bed but felt miles apart. There was no explosive argument, No slammed doors, just a slow quieting. A kind of drifting that happens when love carries too much weight and neither person knows how to lift it anymore. Kalen started coming home later, not out of avoidance but uncertainty. He feared the silence more than any words Alina might speak, because by then they weren't angry with each other, they were simply tired. Tired of trying and failing. Tired of crying in separate rooms. Tired of hoping in secret. Alina stopped leaving brochures on the nightstand. She stopped circling appointment dates on the fridge calendar. Kalen noticed, but he didn't ask. He didn't have the strength to watch hope rise just to watch it fall again. One night, after another appointment that ended with more questions than answers, Kalen sat alone in the living room. The fireplace was lit, but the heat never reached him. Alina walked in quietly, holding a glass of water. She didn't hand it to him. She just sat down. For a long time, they said nothing. Then came her voice, low, brittle, but steady. "Do you even want this anymore?" He turned slowly, unsure of what she meant. "Us," she clarified, her eyes avoiding his. "Do you still want us?" The words struck him harder than anything he'd heard in his life. He didn't answer immediately, not because he didn't know, but because he didn't know how to say it. So instead, he stood, walked to her, and knelt in front of the woman he still loved more than anything. "You think I stopped wanting this because I don't talk about it," he whispered. "But Alina, I stopped talking because every time I opened my mouth, I failed you." Her eyes welled up, not because of his words, but because he finally said something that sounded like the truth. They didn't kiss. They didn't cry out loud. They simply leaned in and rested their foreheads together. For the first time in a long time, they just held on. Not out of habit, not out of guilt, but because they still could. Have you or someone you love faced a silent storm like this? Share your thoughts in the comments. Someone reading might need your strength. They went to bed that night without speaking, but they lay closer than they had in months. Her hand rested on his chest. His fingers found hers. No promises were made, no new plans discussed, but the wall between them had a crack now, and through it something began to breathe again. The night was still, not in a romantic way, just still, as if the house itself had grown tired of listening to the silence between them. Kalen stood by the bedroom window, shirt sleeves rolled, top button undone, hands tucked into his pockets like he was trying to hold something together inside himself. Behind him, Alina lay in bed, awake, watching him. "Do you ever wonder if we made a mistake?" she asked quietly. Her voice didn't accuse. It searched. He didn't turn around. "Not yet. I wonder if we've become something we promised we never would," she added. He exhaled through his nose, jaw tight. "You think I don't feel this too?" he said. "The space between us?" She sat up slowly. "I think you feel it. I just don't think you know what to do with it." He finally turned. The light from the hallway carved a faint outline across his face, strong but worn. "Every time we tried, and it didn't work, I didn't know what to say to you, so I said nothing. I thought I was protecting you." Alina's voice caught. "I didn't need protection, Kale. I needed you." He walked to the edge of the bed and sat down beside her, close enough to feel her breath, but not yet close enough to touch. "It felt like, the more we lost, the less of me I had left to give," he admitted. "I know," she whispered. "But you never had to fix it. You just had to stay in it with me." For a few seconds, nothing moved. Not their hands, not their eyes. And then she reached out, rested her palm against his chest over his heartbeat, the only sound between them. "I miss when this was easy," she said. "It was never easy," he replied. "It was just new." That made her laugh. Not fully, but enough to crack something open between them. He leaned into her hand. She leaned into his shoulder. No fireworks, no music. Just a simple surrender to what had always been underneath the silence, love that had never truly left. They lay down, facing each other, foreheads nearly touching, eyes half closed, and they breathed together. That was it. No promises, no plans, just a decision not to let go. It was the first night in years they both fell asleep without tension in their bodies. It didn't solve anything, but it reminded them of one truth they had nearly forgotten. They were still us. If this story is pulling at your heart, please share it. Someone might need to hear this today. The cabin stood quiet, surrounded by tall trees and open sky. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel empty. It felt waiting. They hadn't come to solve anything, just a pause. No charts, no doctors, no procedures. Just space to feel like each other again. The air smelled of pine and smoke. The fireplace crackled gently, warming the room in soft, steady waves. Alina moved through the cabin slowly. Her fingers brushed across old books, a woven blanket, the edge of the kitchen counter. She wore one of Kaylin's sweaters, loose, oversized, sleeves falling over her hands. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. Kaylin watched her from across the room, the way she moved, the way the light caught in her hair, not with desire, but with remembrance, and something deeper than both, longing without pain. That night, they made a simple dinner and ate in shared quiet. No tension, no effort, just calm. Later, they sat near the fire. 2 chairs, 1 blanket, her legs folded beneath her, his hand resting near hers. "I miss us," she said, eyes low. "So do I," he replied. "Every part of us." She looked over at him, not searching for an apology, not demanding anything, just asking without words. "Then let's stop missing," she whispered. He stood. She stood with him, no rush, no hesitating. They held each other gently, forehead to forehead. His hand cupped her cheek like it was something sacred. Her fingers rested lightly on his chest. There were no grand declarations, just presence, the unspoken language of people who had broken apart and quietly chosen to come back. They moved to the bedroom, step by step. That night they didn't seek escape. They found home in each other. Every touch was reverent, every kiss patient. They didn't fill the silence, they breathed into it. They made love slowly, not out of need, but out of something older, something rooted. They weren't trying to create anything. They were remembering who they already were. And in the stillness of that sacred night, something began to shift. Later, Alina lay against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm beneath his ribs. He ran his fingers gently through her hair. "We're still here," she said softly. "We never left," he replied. Outside, the trees stood still. The sky moved quietly above them. Inside, the future took its first step, unseen, unspoken, but set into motion. What they didn't know was that this night would rewrite their story. It started with a feeling Alina couldn't explain. 2 weeks after they returned from the cabin, she noticed herself moving slower in the mornings. There was a fog in her head that coffee wouldn't lift. She told herself it was exhaustion, maybe stress, nothing new. Then came the nausea, faint, inconsistent, but familiar enough to stir something in her chest. She didn't tell Kaylin, not yet, not because she didn't trust him, but because hope had become heavy, and she was tired of lifting it only to watch it drop again. She had thrown away so many tests over the years that it felt mechanical now. Buy, wait, check, cry, repeat. This time, she bought just one. No digital screen, just lines. She took the test early on a Sunday, set it on the counter, and walked out of the bathroom before the timer hit 3 minutes. She couldn't watch it change. Couldn't stand the stillness while her stomach twisted. Kaylin was in the kitchen pouring tea when he heard the bathroom door creak open. He turned slightly but said nothing. Alina gave him a soft glance, then walked past. He noticed something in her hand, a wrapper, faint, pink. He waited until she was out of sight, then stepped quietly into the bathroom. The test sat there, 2 lines, bold, unmistakable. He stared, not moving, not breathing. His hand trembled slightly, but he didn't pick it up. Just looked. For years, every test had felt like a quiet goodbye. This one was different. Alina returned to find him sitting at the edge of their bed, elbows on his knees, test still in his hand. His shoulders didn't shake. He wasn't crying, but his eyes glistened in a way she hadn't seen in years. He looked up. "You didn't want to hope," he said. She nodded slowly. "I didn't know if I could." He reached for her hand, pulled her gently to him. "Then let me hope for both of us." They went to the doctor the next day. No announcement, no rush, just quiet steps. At 6 weeks, they saw a tiny flicker on the monitor. Heartbeat. 1. They gripped each other's hands, eyes wide, no words. They came back at 7 weeks, hands still shaking from the memory. The room was dim and quiet, filled with the low hum of machines. Alina lay back on the cushioned table, her hand locked tightly in Kaylin's. The technician greeted them softly, offering a calm smile. No small talk, no assumptions, just a nod of respect. She applied the gel, turned the monitor, and moved the wand across Alina's abdomen. There it was again. The flicker. Heartbeat 1. Clear, steady. Alina exhaled slowly, like she'd been holding her breath for years. The technician leaned in a little, her expression shifting. "There's another." Alina blinked. "Another what?" "Heartbeat." Kaylin sat up straighter, his hand stiffening slightly around hers. The technician didn't stop. Her eyes stayed on the screen, her brows pulled together in focus. Wait. She adjusted the wand again. Silence. Then she looked at them. There's a third. Alina covered her mouth. Her other hand clenched tightly around Kaelin's. The room was still. 3 heartbeats, 3 lives, not a dream, not a maybe, not a number on a chart. Real, alive, moving. Kaelin didn't speak, not because he had nothing to say. He simply couldn't find anything strong enough to hold the weight of what he felt. Tears filled his eyes, but didn't fall right away. He stood slowly, walked to the monitor, and placed his palm gently on the edge of the machine, like he was afraid touching it too hard might break the moment. He looked at Alina. She was crying now, but smiling, hands pressed to her cheeks, body trembling under the weight of disbelief. You're going to be a father, she said, her voice breaking. Of 3. Kaelin turned back to the screen, where those flickers of light danced rhythmically. For years he had been known as the man with everything but a family. The man who gave others opportunity but couldn't grasp his own. The man they whispered about when his back was turned. None of it mattered now. He reached for Alina's hand again, kissed her fingers, and held them against his lips. If this gave you chills, hit that like button. Let's show the world what perseverance and love can lead to. He didn't ask questions, didn't wonder how or why or what came next. He just looked at the screen and whispered something only she could hear. Thank you for not giving up on us. She squeezed his hand. We're not done yet, she said. That night they didn't call anyone. They sat on the floor of their bedroom, backs against the wall, knees pulled close, just the 2 of them, laughing, crying, processing the quiet miracle that had quietly taken root. The announcement wasn't flashy. Just a brief statement released by Vier Global's media team on a Thursday morning. Mr. and Mrs. Kaelin Vier are expecting 3 children. They ask for privacy as they prepare for this next chapter. That was it, but within hours it was everywhere. Financial blogs picked it up first, then the lifestyle outlets, then the gossip pages. Screenshots circled. Headlines multiplied. Infertile CEO stuns public with triple pregnancy news. From boardrooms to baby bottles, Vier's new role. By lunchtime, Kaelin's name was trending. Some celebrated, others questioned. The speculation began almost immediately. Anonymous comments filled the margins of every article. No way that's natural. He must have used a donor. After all these years? Something's off. Triplets? Please. That's a headline strategy. Strangers crafted theories like they were entitled to answers. Some disguised their doubt as curiosity. Others weren't subtle at all. But Kaelin didn't respond. Not once. A few close colleagues reached out. Some genuinely offered congratulations. Some masked their discomfort with politeness. One former associate even suggested a PR angle. You could spin this into a legacy brand story. Kaelin declined every interview. He ignored every invitation, because some stories aren't written for the press. In private, his world was quiet, still, full of motion but not noise. He spent more time at home, helped Alina adjust to the new routine, folded baby clothes, installed tiny shelves, watched instructional videos on how to hold a newborn properly. He wasn't performing, he was preparing. One afternoon, as he stood near the nursery window, his assistant brought in a folder of coverage summaries from the company's PR team. Kaelin didn't even open it. Let them talk, he said. They're late to the story. The assistant hesitated. Should we clear up the donor questions? No. He looked back toward the crib. The greatest victory, he said quietly, is peace, not proof. That night, he sat beside Alina as she rested, her body already feeling the weight of what was growing inside her. Her feet were swollen. Her back ached, but her eyes had a light in them he hadn't seen in years. They're going to talk, aren't they? She asked. They already are. And you don't care? He smiled. I've waited a long time for this moment. I'm not wasting it explaining things to people who never asked about our pain. She leaned against him, her head fit perfectly beneath his chin. Good, she whispered. Let them wonder. We know the truth. By the second trimester, the glow that people always talked about never came. Instead, Alina felt the weight of everything. Her ankles swelled, her back throbbed constantly, her energy vanished by mid-morning. Carrying 3 lives was a miracle, but it was also relentless. Bed rest was recommended, then required. At first, she protested. She'd never liked being still, but eventually her body left her no choice. Kaelin adjusted without hesitation. Meetings were moved, calls rescheduled, office hours shortened. Some decisions at VR Global were delegated for the first time in over a decade. Each morning began with him placing a hand on her belly before he even opened his eyes. Not to check, not to count kicks, just to feel them there. He brewed her tea the way she liked it, helped her shower, sat with her while she napped, never far from reach. When the aches became too much, he massaged her legs until her muscles loosened. When she couldn't sleep, he read aloud. Not novels, children's books, stories they'd once picked out years ago, back when they believed a nursery would soon be needed. Now, those pages carried weight. They weren't just stories, they were promises. At night, he would talk to her belly. He didn't use baby voices or silly rhymes. He told the girls about their mother, how strong she was, how much she'd fought for them. She studied him in silence. The man who once struggled to show affection was now ironing tiny mittens. "You never stopped loving me, did you?" she asked. He didn't look up right away. He finished folding, then placed the clothing in a drawer he'd organized by size and season. Only then did he sit beside her and take her hand. "Never," he said. "I just forgot how to show it." She nodded, blinking fast. Then she guided his hand back to her belly, where movement fluttered just beneath the surface. "Then let's never forget again." That night, they didn't talk much. There was nothing left to explain. Only things to feel. She rested against him, her breathing calm. He brushed her hair back from her face and pressed a kiss to her temple. He stayed awake long after she'd fallen asleep, just watching her, just listening to the rhythm of something he thought he'd never hear, a home full of life. There were complications, of course. Nothing about carrying 3 children was easy. But every time the doctor frowned or paused too long during a checkup, Kaylin squeezed her hand a little tighter. He never panicked in front of her, never looked afraid, because fear wouldn't serve her, presence would. Alina once asked him if he missed the life they had before, the freedom, the quiet. He laughed. "This is the first time in my life that quiet has ever sounded good." They counted weeks with cautious joy, measured the growth of 3 daughters in grams and heartbeats. He spoke less at work now, but at home he talked more than he ever had, to her, to them, to himself sometimes, just aloud, wondering how so much had changed so quickly, and how it all felt right. To everyone who's ever held on to hope when things seemed impossible, subscribe. Your story isn't over yet. By the 3rd trimester, she couldn't walk more than a few steps at a time. He carried her to the bath, to the couch, sometimes just across the hallway so she didn't feel defeated. He didn't act like a hero. He never made speeches. He just showed up, every moment, every hour. They didn't need to speak about the past anymore. It didn't hurt the same way, not because it was forgotten, but because something stronger had grown in its place. A life made not from ease, but from endurance. And 3 small hearts, growing stronger every day, were the proof. It happened faster than they expected. 32 weeks. Alina had been feeling unusual pressure for 2 days, but she insisted it was just fatigue. By the 3rd morning, the pressure became pain. Sharp, low, rhythmic. The doctor didn't hesitate. "We're moving now. It's time." There was no waiting, no drawn-out explanations. Alina was wheeled into surgery. Kaylin walked beside her, fully suited, holding her hand as tightly as he could without hurting her. "Stay with me," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. The delivery room was bright and focused. Dozens of hands moved quickly, everyone knowing their place. Alina gripped his hand the entire time. The first cry broke the air, then another, then one more. 3 voices, small, sharp, alive. Alina turned her face toward him, eyes filled with tears. She was too exhausted to speak, but she didn't need to. He kissed her forehead. "You did it," he whispered. "You brought them here." The girls were rushed to the neonatal unit. "Standard protocol," the doctor said. "Just precaution." But Kaylin couldn't shake the tightness in his chest. He watched them through the glass. Tiny tubes, machines, monitors beeping steadily. But they were breathing, fighting, living. Hours later, one of the nurses led him in, one at a time. He stood beside the first bassinet and looked down. "Isolde," he said softly. "The one we chose when we were still dreaming." He touched her foot gently through the open side of the incubator. "I've waited my whole life for you." He stepped to the next. "Mira," he whispered. "Bright one. You came second, but you kicked first. I've waited my whole life for you." At the last crib, his throat caught. The smallest of the 3. The one who barely made a sound. "Nara," he breathed. Quiet strength. "I've waited my whole life for you." He didn't cry loudly. There was no collapse. Just a man standing still, shoulders low, heart wide open. Every wound, every year, every whisper. every loss. All of it led to this moment. 3 daughters. 3 names they'd spoken into the air long before they knew if they'd ever get to say them aloud. Later, Alina woke, weak but steady. Kalen sat beside her, a photograph in his hand. He showed her. 3 tiny girls, swaddled, eyes closed. "They're here," he said. She touched the photo, voice soft from exhaustion. "You look like you've been crying." He smiled. "I have." She looked up at him, her hand resting on her belly, now empty but full of meaning. "I still can't believe it." He leaned forward and kissed her fingers. "Believe it. They're real. They're ours. And they made it." Outside the window, the world continued. Cars moved, people rushed, headlines changed, 3 lives, 1 moment, and a man who had once been mocked, now quietly holding the future. It had been nearly 7 years since the triplets were born, 7 years since Kalen first walked into a hospital nursery and whispered promises to 3 sleeping daughters. His company had grown, expanded into more countries, added new divisions. But that was no longer the part of his story he spoke about most. The keynote invitation came from a leadership summit in Chicago. A panel of executives, venture leaders, and founders were scheduled to speak. Kalen had declined events like this for years, too busy, too private. But this one, he accepted. The auditorium was full. A spotlight swept the stage. A polished moderator welcomed him and listed his accomplishments. There were nods of recognition, murmurs of approval. Then came the final question. In a career filled with milestones, what do you consider your greatest achievement? Kalen didn't rush to answer. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded photo. Nothing glossy, just a simple print. He unfolded it slowly and placed it on the table beside the microphone. The screen behind him lit up with the same image, Alina, barefoot in their backyard, smiling as 3 girls, identical in shape, wildly different in spirit, chased each other across the grass. He looked up at the audience. "This," he said, pointing to the photo. "This family, that's my real empire." The room fell into complete stillness. He didn't mention quarterly returns. He didn't talk about logistics or strategy. Instead, he told them about learning how to braid hair before a client meeting, about burning pancakes on Sunday mornings, about reading bedtime stories in 3 different voices because each daughter insisted on her own version. "I've signed deals worth millions," he said. "But nothing ever felt bigger than hearing someone call me Dad for the first time." A few smiled, a few wiped their eyes, others simply listened, not to be impressed, but to be reminded. Because the man who once wore pressure like armor now wore peace like skin. He ended the talk with a line that stayed with every person in the room. "People used to whisper about what I didn't have. Now I live a life loud enough to silence every one of them, not through answers, but through joy." Later, after the applause, a younger entrepreneur approached him. "That part about your daughters, it hit me. I've been measuring everything by profit. I think I forgot what I was actually building." Kalen shook his hand. It's never too late to build something that matters. As he walked out of the venue, his phone buzzed. A photo came through from Alina. The girls were in the garden again, faces smudged with soil, holding up a crooked little sign. "We miss you, Daddy." He smiled, not because it was perfect, but because it was theirs. He didn't just get the last word. He got a life. Not every battle is loud. Not every breakthrough makes headlines. Sometimes, the greatest victories happen in rooms no one else sees. Kalen's story isn't just about children. It's about holding on when everything around you says to let go. About showing up when love gets quiet. About choosing someone, not once, but again and again. Infertility doesn't mean failure. Silence doesn't mean absence. And just because a chapter takes longer to write, doesn't mean the ending won't be beautiful. Legacy isn't always written in contracts or carved into buildings. Sometimes it's in bedtime stories, in whispered prayers, in a name spoken for the first time by a child you were told you'd never meet. So if you're watching this and you've been waiting for a turn, waiting for a sign, waiting for something to feel possible again, let this story remind you, you are not behind, you are becoming. Love can be buried by time, but it doesn't have to stay there. It can be found again, in a glance, a hand held, a quiet night where 2 people remember what it means to keep going. Miracles don't always come on your timeline, but they do come for those who don't stop loving, even in silence.